Girl arrives at school trembling and whispers 4 words to the teacher, who turns pale. Let us know where you're tuning in from. Leave a comment before we get started and enjoy the journey. Sarah Mitchell stood at the classroom window, frowning slightly as she watched her students file out for recess. Her eyes followed one child in particular, Emma Wilson, a 7-year-old who normally bounded with energy but now moved with unusual hesitation, hanging back from the others. Everything all right with Emma? Asked Dorothy, the teaching assistant. I'm not sure, Sarah replied. She's been so quiet lately. Not at all like herself. Sarah had been teaching elementary school for 12 years, long enough to recognize when something was truly wrong. Emma had always been a ray of sunshine, eager to answer questions, quick to help classmates. Her artwork always featuring bright colors and smiling faces. But over the past 2 weeks, that sunshine had dimmed considerably. When the children returned from recess, Sarah noticed Emma wincing as she sat at her desk. Art time, everyone, Sarah announced, watching as excited chatter filled the room. Emma, alone, remained silent, mechanically reaching for her supplies. As the children worked, Sarah moved between desks, offering encouragement. She paused at Emma's station, where the girl was drawing with dark blues and grays, a stark departure from her usual rainbow palette. That's an interesting drawing, Sarah said gently. Can you tell me about it? Emma shrugged, not meeting her teacher's eyes. It's just a picture. After school, Sarah approached Emma as she slowly packed her backpack. Emma, would you like to help me organize the art supplies before you go? Your mom usually picks you up a little later anyway. The girl nodded reluctantly. As they sorted colored pencils together, Sarah carefully broached the subject. You know, Emma, if something's bothering you, you can always talk to me. Emma's small hands froze, her breathing quickening slightly. Is someone making you unhappy or scared? Sarah asked softly. No, Emma whispered, but her trembling hands betrayed her. Sarah noticed Emma's sleeve had ridden up slightly. What she saw made her blood run cold, distinct purplish bruises encircling the child's wrist, unmistakably in the pattern of finger marks. Emma, what happened to your arm? Sarah asked, keeping her voice carefully steady despite her racing heart. Emma yanked her sleeve down. Nothing. I fell. Those marks don't look like a fall, Sarah said gently. Did someone grab you? Emma's eyes filled with tears, her small frame beginning to shake. I can't tell. He said not to tell anyone. Who said that, sweetheart? Before Emma could answer, they heard a car horn outside. I have to go, she whispered, hastily grabbing her backpack and rushing toward the door. Sarah watched her go, stomach churning with dread. Tomorrow, she would call Emma's mother. Someone was hurting this child, and Sarah was determined to find out who. Jennifer Hayes organized her lesson plans, while her 3rd-grade students completed their morning assignments. Her attention kept drifting to Lily Baker, who sat hunched over her desk in the back row. Jennifer had always admired Lily's enthusiasm and creativity, but lately, the child seemed like a different person entirely. The classroom door opened as Principal Warren stepped in. Ms. Hayes, the parish representatives are here to discuss next week's catechism schedule. Jennifer nodded. Class, please continue working quietly. I'll be right back. As she headed toward the door, she noticed Lily's face drain of color at the mention of catechism. The girl's pencil froze mid-sentence, her small body suddenly rigid with tension. After the brief meeting, Jennifer returned to find her students working diligently, all except Lily, who was staring blankly at her paper, untouched since Jennifer had left. When the lunch bell rang, Jennifer gently asked Lily to stay behind. Is everything okay? You seem upset today. Lily shrugged, eyes fixed on the floor. I'm fine. Are you worried about something? Maybe catechism class? At the mention of catechism, Lily's head snapped up, eyes wide with unmistakable fear. I don't want to go anymore, she whispered. Why not? You used to enjoy learning about, I don't want to go. Lily's sudden outburst was so uncharacteristic that Jennifer was momentarily stunned into silence. Lily, has something happened at catechism that made you uncomfortable? Lily shook her head vigorously, but tears welled in her eyes. I just don't feel good on Wednesdays. Can I stay in the library instead? Jennifer knelt to Lily's eye level. Sweetheart, if someone at church is making you upset or scared, you can tell me. No one, Lily insisted, but her voice quavered tellingly. Please don't make me go. That afternoon, Jennifer called Catherine Baker, Lily's mother. Catherine, I'm concerned about Lily. She seems extremely anxious about attending catechism class. Catherine sighed heavily. She was crying all morning yesterday before church. I practically had to drag her there. I thought she was just being difficult. Children don't usually develop such strong aversions without reason, Jennifer said, carefully. Has she mentioned anyone at church? Maybe Father Thomas? The line went silent for a moment. Actually, she's been having nightmares. Last night she woke up screaming, something about Father doesn't like noise. Jennifer's stomach tightened. Catherine, I think we should take this seriously. I've noticed similar anxiety in another student who attends St. Mary's. What are you suggesting? Catherine's voice had taken on a defensive edge. I'm not suggesting anything definitive, Jennifer assured her quickly. But I do think we should be attentive to what Lily's behavior is telling us. Children often can't verbalize when something's wrong. After hanging up, Jennifer stared at her phone, debating her next move. Her brother Robert was a detective with the police department. Perhaps he could offer some guidance without making this official yet. As she dialed his number, Jennifer couldn't shake the image of Lily's terrified face when catechism was mentioned. Something was very wrong, and she was increasingly certain it involved Father Thomas, the beloved parish priest, whom the entire community trusted implicitly. Sarah Mitchell took a deep breath as she approached St. Mary's Church. The afternoon. Sun cast long shadows across the immaculate grounds as parishioners filtered out after Wednesday services. She spotted Father Thomas greeting people at the entrance, his warm smile and gentle handshakes painting the perfect picture of pastoral care. She had spent the previous night wrestling with her concerns about Emma. The bruises weren't something she could ignore, but approaching a respected community figure like Father Thomas required delicacy. Miss Mitchell, Father Thomas called, his voice pleasant as he noticed her approaching. What a lovely surprise. Don't usually see you here midweek, Father. Thomas, Sarah nodded politely. I was hoping we might speak privately about one of my students. Something flickered across his face. So briefly Sarah almost missed it, before his expression settled back into gentle concern. Of course. Let's go to my office. They walked silently through the church to a small, tidy office at the rear. Religious texts lined the bookshelves, and children's drawings were carefully pinned to a corkboard. Sarah noticed one from Emma, dated months ago, featuring bright colors and smiling figures. Now, how can I help? Thomas asked, folding his hands on the desk. Sarah chose her words carefully. I'm concerned about Emma Wilson. She's been unusually withdrawn lately, and yesterday I noticed concerning marks on her wrists. Father Thomas's expression remained composed, sympathetic. Poor child. Children her age are prone to accidents, aren't they? Always climbing and running. These didn't look like accidents, Sarah said firmly. They looked like someone had grabbed her wrists. Hard enough to leave bruises? Thomas leaned back slightly. That's a very serious implication, Miss Mitchell. I'm not implying anything specific, Sarah clarified. I'm simply concerned and wondered if Emma had mentioned anything troubling during her catechism classes, though Thomas smiled reassuringly. Emma is a sensitive child. Sometimes children misinterpret completely innocent interactions. Perhaps someone guided her firmly across a street or prevented her from falling. Sarah noticed how smoothly he offered alternative explanations, how his calm never wavered. There was something practiced about his response that made her increasingly uneasy. I should speak with her myself, Thomas continued. Children often need gentle guidance to understand their experiences correctly. That won't be necessary, Sarah said quickly. an instinctive protectiveness flaring. I've already spoken with her mother. This time, the flicker in Thomas's eyes was unmistakable. A flash of calculation, quickly masked by pastoral concern. Of course, that's appropriate. He nodded. I'm here to support Emma and her family however needed. Please let me know if there's anything else I can do. As Sarah stood to leave, Father Thomas walked her to the door, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Thank you for your dedication to your students. It's admirable, though sometimes our concerns can lead us to see problems where simple misunderstandings exist. Walking back to her car, Sarah couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. Father Thomas had said all the right things, expressed appropriate concern, yet something felt profoundly wrong. His composure had seemed too perfect, his explanations too ready. She slipped into her car and sat quietly for a moment. Far from being reassured, her conversation with Father Thomas had only deepened her suspicions. Detective Robert Collins rubbed his tired eyes as he finished the paperwork from his last case. The precinct was quieting down for the evening when his phone vibrated. Seeing his sister Jennifer's name, he answered immediately. Jenny, everything okay? Her voice came through tense and low. Rob, I need your advice. Professionally. He straightened in his chair. Jennifer rarely called about work matters. What's going on? It's about Lily, she said, referring to her niece, and possibly other children at St. Mary's. Robert listened intently as Jennifer detailed her observations. Lily's sudden fear of church, her resistance to attending catechism, the nightmares. Then she mentioned another teacher's concerns about a student with unexplained bruises. The girl, Emma, apparently, had marks on her wrists, Jennifer explained. Sarah Mitchell, her teacher, spoke with Father Thomas today and came away more concerned, not less. Robert's jaw tightened. As an officer with 15 years on the force, he'd seen too many cases where respected community figures abused their positions of trust. Has either child made a direct accusation? He asked, already reaching for a notepad. No, they're both too frightened to speak openly, but their behavior changed dramatically after starting catechism with Father Thomas. Robert thought of Lily, bright, affectionate Lily who always greeted him with enthusiastic hugs. The thought of anyone harming her made his blood boil. I'll look into this quietly, he promised. We need to be careful. These are serious concerns. But without direct disclosures, we're limited in official actions. I know, Jennifer sighed. But Rob, I've been teaching for 12 years. When children suddenly change like this, something's wrong. And seeing it in two different girls from different classes. I believe you, he assured her. Let me do some preliminary checking. Can you get me Sarah Mitchell's contact information? After hanging up, Robert sat motionless, processing the implications. Father Thomas was beloved in their community, known for his youth outreach programs and gentle demeanor. Allegations against him, even unofficial ones, would cause tremendous upheaval. But if children were being harmed, none of that mattered. Robert opened his computer and began searching for any complaints or unusual patterns related to St. Mary's Church or Father Thomas Spencer. Nothing immediately concerning appeared in the official records, but Robert knew predators often operated for years without formal complaints. He dialed Captain Barnes, his supervisor. Sir, I may have a sensitive situation developing. Possible child endangerment involving St. Mary's Church. There was a pause before Barnes responded. That's serious, Collins. What's your connection here? My niece may be involved, and another child from a different family. Proceed carefully, Barnes warned. Gather preliminary information, but maintain distance from formal investigation due to your personal connection. I'll assign Anderson to partner with you if this develops further. After hanging up, Robert stared at the photo on his desk. Lily, at her 7th birthday party, arms wrapped around his neck, both beaming at the camera. The protective instinct that made him a good detective merged with his love for his niece, hardening into resolve. Whatever was happening at St. Mary's, he would uncover it, no matter who was involved or what community backlash might follow. The Baker household had finally quieted for the night. Catherine Baker moved silently through the hallway, checking that doors were locked and lights turned off. The conversation with Jennifer Hayes had left her deeply unsettled, though she'd tried to dismiss the teacher's concerns as overreaction. Surely Lily was just going through a phase. Children did that sometimes, didn't they? Yet as she paused outside her daughter's bedroom door, Catherine couldn't silence the whisper of doubt. Lily had always loved church activities. The sudden change was undeniable, as was the fear that now seemed permanently etched into her daughter's face on Sunday mornings. Catherine peered into the darkened room where her daughters slept. Rachel, 12, was sprawled across her bed near the window, while Lily's small form was curled tightly under her blankets against the wall. Catherine was about to continue to her own bedroom when she noticed Rachel wasn't asleep. The girl was sitting up, watching Lily with worried eyes. "Rachel," Catherine whispered. "Everything okay, honey?" Rachel startled slightly. "Mom, I was just—" She hesitated, glancing at her sister. "Lily's been crying a lot at night." Catherine stepped into the room, closing the door softly behind her. "Has she said why?" Rachel shook her head. "She won't tell me, but she talks in her sleep sometimes." The older girl's voice dropped even lower. "She mentions Father Thomas a lot. It doesn't sound good." A chill ran down Catherine's spine. "What does she say exactly?" "Just fragments. 'Please don't, and it hurts,' and 'Father Thomas, stop.'" Rachel looked up at her mother, eyes glistening. In the dim light from the hallway. "Mom, did something happen to her at church?" Catherine sat heavily on the edge of Rachel's bed, her mind reeling. She'd rationalized away Lily's behavior for weeks, attributing it to childhood whims or tiredness. Now those explanations felt hollow, even irresponsible. "I don't know, sweetheart," she admitted, "but I'm going to find out." As if sensing they were talking about her, Lily stirred in her sleep, whimpering softly. The sound tore at Catherine's heart. She moved to Lily's bed, gently stroking her daughter's hair. "Shh, baby, you're safe," she murmured. Lily's eyes fluttered open, unfocused at first, then widening with recognition. "Mommy?" Her voice was small, fragile. "I'm here, sweetheart," Catherine assured her. "Bad dream?" Lily nodded, clutching her stuffed bear tighter. Catherine noticed the gesture was protective rather than comforting, as if Lily was shielding the toy. "Do you want to talk about it?" Catherine asked gently. Lily shook her head violently, burying her face in the bear's worn fur. Rachel moved to sit on Lily's bed too, forming a protective circle around her sister. "It's okay, Lil. You can tell us. No one will be mad." Lily remained silent, trembling slightly under her blankets. Catherine was about to suggest they all try to get some sleep, when Rachel spoke again, her voice gentle but firm. "Lily, did Father Thomas do something to hurt you?" Lily's head jerked up, eyes wide with panic. "You can't tell. You promised you wouldn't tell." Catherine felt the blood drain from her face. "Lily, when did you tell Rachel anything about Father Thomas?" "Last week," Rachel said quietly. "She made me promise not to tell anyone. He said bad things would happen," Lily whispered, tears streaming down her face now. "He said it would be my fault if I told." Catherine swallowed hard, fighting to keep her voice steady despite the rage building inside her. "Lily, sweetheart, what exactly did Father Thomas do?" Lily shook her head again, more violently this time. "I can't say. He'll know." "He won't know," Rachel assured her, taking her sister's hand. "He's not here, and he can't hurt you anymore if we tell Mom." Lily looked uncertainly between her mother and sister, clearly torn between terror and the desperate need to unburden herself. "He takes us to the special prayer room," she finally whispered, voice so faint Catherine had to lean closer. "He says, we need to learn discipline to be close to God." "What happens in the prayer room?" Catherine asked, dreading the answer. "He ties our hands with special prayer ropes," Lily's voice wavered. "He says it helps us focus on God's words, but it hurts, and I don't like it." Catherine felt sick. "Does he touch you in ways that make you uncomfortable?" Lily nodded almost imperceptibly. "He checks if our hearts are pure, under our clothes." Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I tried to be good, Mommy, but he said I wasn't pure enough yet. Catherine pulled Lily into her arms, holding her trembling body close. Over her daughter's head, she met Rachel's eyes, seeing her older daughter's shock and dawning horror. "Listen to me, both of you," Catherine said firmly. "What Father Thomas did was wrong. Very wrong. It wasn't your fault, Lily, and you didn't do anything bad. He did. But he said he lied," Catherine stated flatly, "to scare you into keeping his secret. But this isn't your secret to keep, and I promise you he will never hurt you again." As Lily cried in her arms, Catherine's mind raced. Jennifer Hayes had been right to be concerned. How many other children might be suffering similar abuse? She thought of Emma Wilson, the other child Jennifer had mentioned. Reaching for her phone with one hand while still holding Lily with the other, she found Sarah Mitchell's number that Jennifer had shared earlier. Across town, Olivia Wilson sat on the edge of Emma's bed, trying to make sense of her daughter's nightmare. Emma had woken screaming, and now sat huddled against her headboard, refusing to lie down again. "Emma, sweetie, what was your dream about?" Olivia asked gently. "The prayer room," Emma mumbled, eyes downcast. Olivia frowned. "What prayer room, honey?" Emma shook her head, pulling her knees tighter to her chest. "I'm not supposed to talk about it." The conversation with Sarah Mitchell flashed through Olivia's mind, the teacher's concerns about Emma's changed behavior, the bruises she'd noticed. At the time, Olivia had been defensive, unwilling to consider that anything truly wrong might be happening. Now, seeing terror etched across her daughter's face, she couldn't deny something was seriously amiss. "Emma, you can tell me anything," Olivia assured her, "even if someone told you to keep it secret." "Father Thomas said bad things would happen," Emma whispered. "To me, to you, if I talked about special prayer time." Olivia went cold. "What happens during special prayer time, Emma?" After a long silence, Emma's words came out in a rush. "He ties our hands with blessed ropes to keep us still while we pray, but they hurt, Mom. They leave marks." The bruises. Sarah had been right. Olivia struggled to keep her voice even. "Does Father Thomas touch you in ways that make you uncomfortable?" Emma nodded almost imperceptibly. "To check if my heart is pure enough." Olivia felt sick with rage and guilt. She'd sent Emma to catechism, trusted Father Thomas completely. How many times had Emma tried to avoid going to church lately? How many signs had she missed? Her phone rang suddenly, startling them both. Olivia didn't recognize the number, but answered anyway, still holding Emma protectively with her free arm. "Is this Olivia Wilson?" a woman's voice asked, tense and urgent. "Yes. Who's calling?" "Catherine Baker. My daughter Lily is in catechism class with Emma, I think. I think they might both be victims of the same situation." Olivia's grip on her phone tightened. "Father Thomas," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Catherine confirmed, her voice breaking slightly. "Lily just told me what's been happening. Emma too, just now." Olivia glanced down at her daughter, who was watching her with wide, fearful eyes. "What do we do?" Jennifer Hayes, Lily's teacher. Her brother is a detective with the police department. His name is Robert Collins. Jennifer says he's already looking into this quietly. Olivia couldn't process everything at once. Her mind kept returning to the marks on Emma's wrists, the fear in her eyes. "I want to call him right now." "I have his number," Catherine said. "But first I think we should talk to each other, compare what our girls have told us. Make sure we understand exactly what's happening before we take it to the police." Olivia agreed, and they made plans to meet at Catherine's house within the hour. After hanging up, she held Emma close, stroking her hair. "Am I in trouble?" Emma asked in a small voice. "No, sweetheart. You did nothing wrong. Nothing at all." Olivia fought back tears. "Father Thomas did something very wrong, and you were very brave to tell me." As she helped Emma get dressed to go to the baker's house, Olivia's phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "Detective Collins will meet us at my house, bringing Sarah Mitchell too." The pieces were finally coming together, connections forming between separate concerns that had seemed isolated. But as relief mixed with her anger, Olivia couldn't help wondering how many other children were suffering in silence, and how would their tight-knit community react when they learned the truth about their beloved priest. The Wilson family kitchen was unnaturally quiet the next morning. Michael Wilson stood by the counter, coffee mug gripped tightly in his hand, staring at his wife with a mixture of disbelief and anger. "You went to Catherine Baker's house at midnight and talked to a detective without even calling me first?" His voice was controlled but tense. "Olivia, do you realize what you're starting?" Olivia sat at the kitchen table, exhaustion evident in her face after the sleepless night. Emma was still in bed, finally resting after the emotional revelations. "I didn't plan it that way, Michael. Emma had a nightmare. She finally told me what's been happening." Olivia's voice cracked slightly. "What was I supposed to do? Ignore it until morning?" Michael set his mug down too forcefully, coffee sloshing over the rim. "You should have called me. We should have discussed this privately before involving the police. There wasn't time for a committee meeting, Michael. Our daughter is being abused." "Allegedly," Michael corrected sharply, then immediately softened at Olivia's expression. "Look, I'm not saying Emma is lying. Kids her age can get confused, misinterpret things." Olivia stared at him incredulously. Misinterpret being tied up? Having her body touched by a grown man? "Did you even look at the bruises on her wrists?" Michael paced the kitchen, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Father Thomas has been our priest for 3 years. He's counseled us, baptized our nephew. Everyone in town respects him. These are extremely serious accusations." "Which is exactly why he's gotten away with it," Olivia countered. "No one wants to believe a beloved priest could do something so horrible, including you, apparently." Michael stopped pacing, his expression pained. "That's not fair. I'm trying to be rational here. False accusations can destroy lives. So can abuse, Michael. It can destroy our daughter's life." The sound of small footsteps interrupted them. Emma stood in the doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit, eyes wide and uncertain. "Are you fighting because of me?" she asked in a small voice. Olivia immediately went to her, kneeling to eye level. "No, sweetie. Dad and I just have different ideas about how to handle what you told me last night." Michael approached cautiously, crouching beside his wife. "Emma, honey, we need to make sure we understand exactly what happened with Father Thomas. Can you tell me too?" Emma's eyes darted between her parents, fear evident. "You said he wouldn't hurt me anymore," she whispered to Olivia. "And he won't." Olivia assured her. "I promise." Michael's expression softened as he watched his daughter's obvious distress. "Emma, did Father Thomas hurt you?" Emma nodded, eyes filling with tears. "In the special prayer room. He said God wanted me to learn discipline. Did he tie your hands?" Michael asked gently. Emma held out her wrists in response, the faint bruises still visible. "With blessed ropes. They hurt." Michael's skepticism faltered visibly. He gently took Emma's small hands in his, examining the marks with growing horror. "And he touched you?" "To check if my heart was pure," Emma whispered. "Under my clothes." Michael closed his eyes briefly, the reality he'd been resisting finally sinking in. When he opened them again, the doubt was gone, replaced by quiet fury. "Thank you for telling me, sweetheart," he said, voice carefully controlled. "You're very brave." As Emma went to get dressed, Michael turned to Olivia, his expression completely transformed. "Call Detective Collins. Tell him I want to be part of the meeting today." Across town, Catherine Baker faced similar resistance, though from a different source. Her mother-in-law, Martha Baker, sat rigidly in the living room, lips pressed into a thin, disapproving line. "You've always been quick to jump to conclusions, Catherine," Martha said. "Father Thomas is a man of God. These accusations are simply unthinkable." Catherine fought to maintain her composure. "Mother Baker, I understand this is difficult to accept, but Lily described specific details. So did Emma Wilson. The same prayer room, the same blessed ropes, the same inappropriate touching." "Children influence each other," Martha insisted. One makes up a story, the others copy it. You're destroying a good man's reputation on the basis of childish fantasies. These aren't fantasies, Catherine said firmly. You didn't see Lily's face when she finally told us. That was genuine fear, real trauma. Martha sniffed disapprovingly. In my day, we respected our church leaders. We didn't run to the police the moment a child said something upsetting. In your day, predators got away with abusing children because no one wanted to believe them. Catherine shot back, her patience finally snapping. The older woman's face flushed with anger. I won't sit here and listen to this. When James gets back from his business trip, he'll set this straight. He's known Father Thomas for years. They play golf together, for heaven's sake. Being good at golf doesn't mean he can't be an abuser, Catherine said, her voice ice cold. And when James gets home, he'll support his daughter, not her abuser. Or he'll answer to me. Martha stood abruptly, gathering her purse. The church community won't stand for this, Catherine. You're making a terrible mistake. As she stormed out, Catherine sank onto the sofa, suddenly drained. Martha's reaction was just a preview of what was coming. The wider community would be divided, angry, disbelieving. Friends would become enemies. Church members would take sides. Upstairs, she could hear Rachel talking softly to Lily, helping her get ready for the meeting with Detective Collins. Catherine was grateful for Rachel's protective instincts toward her sister. At 12, Rachel understood more than they wished she did, but her support for Lily never wavered. Catherine's phone buzzed with a text from Olivia. Michael's coming to the meeting. He believes Emma now. At least some minds could be changed. When confronted with the truth, Catherine only hoped Detective Collins would be able to build a case strong enough to convince the rest of the community. At the police station, Robert Collins reviewed his notes from the previous night's informal meeting. The consistent details between the girls' accounts were damning. Specific language about special prayer time, the blessed ropes used to restrain them, the touching disguised as checking for purity of heart. Classic grooming techniques, using religious language to normalize abuse and ensure silence. Captain Barnes entered his office, closing the door behind him. How's it looking, Collins? Bad, Robert replied grimly. The accounts are detailed, consistent, and show clear patterns of predatory behavior. These aren't isolated incidents or misunderstandings. Barnes nodded soberly. The formal interviews are scheduled for this afternoon? Yes. Child Services is sending their best interviewer, and we'll record everything properly. We're doing this by the book. Good. Because you know what's coming next. Robert did know. Once formal allegations were made against Father Thomas, the community would erupt. The church would likely close ranks. Parishioners would be outraged, disbelieving. The families would be ostracized, perhaps even threatened. I've requested additional patrols near the victims' homes, Robert said. Just in case. Barnes raised an eyebrow. You anticipate that level of backlash? Father Thomas has been at St. Mary's for 3 years. Before that, he was at parishes in Millfield and St. Andrews. He's built a reputation as a dedicated youth minister. People trust him implicitly. Robert's jaw tightened. That's exactly how predators operate. They establish themselves as beyond reproach. And your personal connection to this case? Barnes asked carefully. I'm maintaining professional distance as much as possible, Robert assured him. Anderson will lead the formal interviews. I'll observe and coordinate, but I won't directly question the children. Barnes seemed satisfied. Keep me updated. This is going to get ugly before it gets better. After Barnes left, Robert checked his watch. The meeting with both families was in an hour. He gathered his files, mentally preparing for the difficult conversations ahead. These families needed to understand what they were facing, not just the legal process, but the social fallout that would inevitably follow. His phone rang. It was Jennifer. Rob, there's something else you should know. Father Thomas is scheduled to lead a youth retreat this weekend. 20 children from the parish, 2 nights at Camp Riverview. Robert felt a chill run down his spine. When was this planned? Months ago. But given what we know now, we can't let that happen, Robert said firmly. but we need to be careful about how we prevent it. If we move too openly against Thomas before we have enough evidence for charges, he might flee. What are you going to do? I'm still working that out. Thanks for the information, Jenny. After hanging up, Robert stared at the blank wall of his office, mind racing. The youth retreat complicated things significantly. They needed to protect those children, but without tipping their hand too early. Father Thomas was clearly sophisticated. In his predatory behavior, he'd been operating for years without raising significant alarms. If he sensed the investigation closing in, he might disappear. Robert had seen it happen before with other predators. They maintained escape plans, kept cash reserves, even established alternate identities. The smart ones were always prepared to run. The afternoon meeting was tense but productive. The Wilsons and Bakers sat together in a private conference room. At the police station, united now in their determination to protect their children, Robert explained the process ahead: the formal interviews, the evidence collection, the eventual confrontation with Father Thomas. This won't be easy, he warned them. The community reaction will be intense. People you've known for years may turn against you. They'll say your children are lying, confused, or influenced by each other. We've already experienced some of that, Catherine said, glancing at Michael Wilson. Family members who can't believe Father Thomas would do such things. Michael nodded grimly. My mother called this morning, livid that we're involving the police. She's known Father Thomas since he arrived at St. Mary's. That's exactly the reaction we'll see multiplied throughout the community, Robert confirmed. People have invested their trust, their faith, their personal relationships in Father Thomas. Accepting these allegations means confronting their own failure to see the danger, their own role in enabling access to your children. So they'll blame us instead, Olivia said bitterly. Many will, yes, it's easier than accepting the truth. Robert looked at each parent in turn. Are you prepared for that? Because once we begin formal proceedings, there's no going back. The four parents exchanged glances, then Catherine spoke for all of them. Our children have already paid the price for our community's blind trust. We won't fail them again by backing down now. Robert nodded, respecting their resolve. Then here's what happens next. Tomorrow morning, our child interview specialist will meet with Emma and Lily separately. We'll gather their statements properly, with all necessary protocols followed. Once we have those on record, we'll move to secure evidence from the church premises, specifically this prayer room the girls have described. Will you arrest Father Thomas? Michael asked. Not immediately, Robert explained. We need solid evidence first. If we move too quickly with too little, he could evade serious charges. Meanwhile, he's free to hurt more children, Olivia said, her voice tight with controlled anger. We'll have surveillance on him, Robert assured her, and we're working on a plan to prevent the youth retreat this weekend without alerting him. To the investigation. As the meeting concluded, Robert noticed how differently Michael Wilson carried himself compared to the beginning. The initial skepticism had vanished, replaced by grim determination. It was a transformation Robert had seen before in parents who finally confronted the unthinkable truth about trusted authority figures. Detective Collins, Michael said quietly, as the others gathered their belongings. I want to apologize. This morning I questioned whether this could really be happening. That's a natural reaction, Mr. Wilson. Michael shook his head. No, it's not. I should have believed my daughter immediately. I should have believed my wife. He looked away, clearly struggling with emotion. I kept thinking about Father Thomas's reputation, the community's reaction, when I should have been thinking about Emma. Robert placed a hand briefly on Michael's shoulder. You're here now. That's what matters to Emma. As the families left, Robert returned to his office, reviewing the case timeline again. Everything needed to be meticulously documented. Every protocol followed precisely. Father Thomas would undoubtedly have excellent legal representation. The church hierarchy might even become involved, potentially trying to shield him. This case would test not only the victim's courage, but the entire community's willingness to face an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the monsters wore collars and spoke of God's love, while inflicting unspeakable harm on the most vulnerable. Father Thomas Spencer straightened his collar before opening the door to his office. Detective Anderson stood outside, Detective Collins a few steps behind him. Thomas had been expecting this visit ever since Sarah Mitchell's pointed questions about Emma Wilson. He'd survived similar inquiries before. "Detectives," he greeted them warmly. "How can I help you today?" "Father Thomas," Anderson replied formally. "We'd like to ask you some questions regarding concerns raised about the children's catechism classes you conduct." Thomas stepped aside, gesturing them into his orderly office. "Of course, please have a seat," Robert Collins observed silently as Thomas settled behind his desk, the picture of pastoral serenity. Nothing in his demeanor suggested guilt or anxiety, just the appropriate concern of a spiritual leader faced with troubling allegations. "We've received reports from several parents regarding inappropriate interactions with children during religious instruction," Anderson began. Thomas's expression shifted to one of measured surprise and concern. "That's very disturbing to hear. What sort of inappropriate interactions are being alleged?" "Physical restraint. Inappropriate touching disguised as religious instruction," Anderson replied, watching Thomas closely. Thomas shook his head slowly, his expression pained but controlled. "Detective, I can assure you nothing of the sort has occurred in my classes. Children sometimes misinterpret necessary guidance. Perhaps a gentle hand on a shoulder to redirect attention, or holding a restless child's hands during prayer to help them focus." Robert noted how smoothly Thomas offered innocent explanations that might account for the allegations, while dismissing their serious nature. It was textbook deflection. "Several children have described a special prayer room where they're taken alone," Anderson continued. "Can you explain what that might refer to?" A flicker of something, calculation perhaps, crossed Thomas's face before his expression returned to concerned confusion. "I occasionally use the small meditation room adjacent to the sanctuary for one-on-one spiritual guidance. Children who need extra attention or are struggling with lessons might receive individual instruction there. Always with the door open, of course." "The children specifically mentioned being restrained with what you called blessed ropes," Anderson pressed. Thomas smiled sadly, shaking his head. "Children have such vivid imaginations. During lessons about spiritual discipline, I sometimes use cord from the altar as a visual aid, representing how we are bound to God's love. I've never physically restrained any child." Robert fought to maintain his professional detachment. Thomas was good, exceptionally good, at manipulating perceptions. Each damning detail was transformed into an innocent misunderstanding through soft words and regretful smiles. "Would you object to showing us this meditation room?" Anderson asked. "Not at all," Thomas replied smoothly. "Though I should mention it's considered a sacred space. We typically remove shoes before entering, out of respect." Robert exchanged a subtle glance with Anderson. The request was clearly designed to make them hesitate, to acknowledge Thomas's authority in this space. "We'll observe appropriate respect," Anderson assured him, "but we will need to conduct a thorough examination of the room." Thomas's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course, whatever helps clarify this unfortunate situation." As they followed Thomas through the church, Robert noted how several parishioners working on flower arrangements or cleaning stopped to greet the priest warmly. Thomas had cultivated a beloved public image, the foundation of his protection. The meditation room was small and dimly lit, with a simple altar against one wall and cushions arranged on the floor. Nothing immediately suggested the abuse the children had described. "As you can see, it's a very simple space," Thomas explained. "Children sometimes find the quiet helpful when they're struggling to understand spiritual concepts." Robert moved carefully around the perimeter, noting a small cabinet in the corner. "What's stored in here, Father?" "Just religious materials, teaching aids, extra prayer books," Thomas answered smoothly. When Robert opened the cabinet, he found exactly that: neatly arranged religious education materials. No evidence of restraints or anything that could have caused the bruising on Emma's wrists. Anderson continued questioning Thomas while Robert completed his preliminary inspection. Nothing obvious supported the children's accounts. If evidence existed here, it was well hidden or had been removed. "Thank you for your cooperation, Father Thomas," Anderson said as they prepared to leave. "We may have additional questions as our inquiry proceeds." "I understand completely," Thomas replied, his composure unwavering. "This sort of misunderstanding can be very distressing for everyone involved. I pray we can resolve it quickly for the children's sake." As they walked back to their vehicle, Robert kept his observations silent until they were safely inside with doors closed. "He's removed anything incriminating," Robert stated flatly. The cabinet had been recently rearranged. Dust patterns showed items had been moved or removed. Anderson nodded grimly. "He's prepared. Probably has been since the first teacher started. Asking questions. Did you notice how he kept redirecting? Reframing everything as misunderstandings or innocent activities misinterpreted by children." "Classic grooming language," Anderson agreed. "Using religious terminology to mask abuse, making the victims feel they're misunderstanding something sacred." Robert stared back at the church, frustration building inside him. "We need a warrant to do a thorough search, but first we need more evidence to justify one. It's a perfect trap." "The children's testimony will be critical," Anderson said. "If their accounts remain consistent during formal interviews, that strengthens our case considerably." "Thomas knows that too," Robert replied grimly. "He's likely already planning how to discredit them or pressure them into changing their stories." Back at the station, Robert reviewed his notes carefully. Thomas had been convincing, almost unnervingly so. His explanations were plausible enough to create reasonable doubt, especially in a community predisposed to believe their respected priest over troubled children. Captain Barnes stopped by Robert's desk, expression serious. "How did it go?" Thomas is skilled at deflection and has removed any obvious evidence. He had an explanation for everything. Robert looked up from his notes. "The formal interviews with the children tomorrow are crucial. Without their consistent testimony, we don't have enough for a warrant." Barnes nodded thoughtfully. "What's your assessment of him?" "Highly intelligent, extremely controlled. No signs of anxiety or defensiveness even when directly accused." Robert's expression darkened. "The most dangerous kind of predator, one who's perfected his mask." "And the youth retreat this weekend? Still scheduled. We're working on a strategy to prevent it without alerting Thomas we're closing in." Robert hesitated before adding, "Sir, I'd like permission to check into Thomas's background more thoroughly. His previous parishes, any complaints that might have been buried." "Do it," Barnes agreed. "But quietly. If he has protectors in the church hierarchy, they might get wind of an extensive background investigation." After Barnes left, Robert called Jennifer. "How are the girls doing?" Jennifer sighed heavily. "Lily's having nightmares. Emma too, according to Sarah Mitchell. They're scared about tomorrow's interviews." "The specialist will handle them gently," Robert assured her. "Make sure Catherine knows Ellen Ramirez is the best child interviewer in the state. She understands how to get accurate information without causing additional trauma." "And Father Thomas? Did you speak with him?" "We did. He denied everything, had explanations for all the details the girls shared." Robert kept his tone neutral, aware his phone wasn't secure. "We're continuing to investigate." After hanging up, Robert turned to his computer, beginning a deeper background search on Father Thomas Spencer. The priest's official record showed a fairly typical career path: seminary training, ordination, assignments to 3 different parishes over 15 years. Nothing in the public record indicated any problems or concerns, but Robert knew from experience that religious institutions often handled misconduct internally, keeping allegations out of official channels. He needed to dig deeper, find people who had worked with Thomas at his previous assignments, perhaps uncover patterns that had been deliberately obscured. He started with St. Andrew's Parish in Millfield, where Thomas had served before coming to St. Mary's. A quick search revealed the current priest was Father James O'Malley. Robert dialed the parish office. St. Andrew's Parish, how may I help you? A friendly female voice answered. This is Detective Robert Collins from Bayview Police Department. I'm hoping to speak with Father O'Malley regarding a former priest at your parish. There was a brief pause before the woman responded, her tone noticeably cooler. May I ask what this is regarding? I'm conducting a background check on Father Thomas Spencer, Robert replied, keeping his explanation vague. Just routine verification of employment history. I'll see if Father O'Malley is available. Several minutes passed before an elderly man came on the line. This is Father O'Malley. I understand you're inquiring about Father Thomas. Yes, Father. I'm verifying some details about his time at St. Andrew's. Father Thomas served our parish faithfully for 4 years before being transferred to St. Mary's, O'Malley replied, his tone carefully measured. Is there something specific you need to know? Were there any concerns or complaints about Father Thomas during his tenure there? Robert asked directly. The silence that followed was telling. What sort of complaints are you referring to, Detective? Any complaints, Father. From parishioners, staff, or children in the parish. Another long pause. I believe you should speak with the diocesan office regarding personnel matters, O'Malley finally said. It wouldn't be appropriate for me to discuss such things. Robert pressed gently. Father, I understand your position, but I'm investigating serious allegations. If there were similar concerns at St. Andrew's, that information could be crucial. O'Malley's voice lowered. Detective, I came to St. Andrew's after Father Thomas left. There were whispers, nothing official in parish records, but several families left the church around the time of his transfer. Do you have names of these families? I don't, O'Malley admitted. The transition records were unusually sparse, but his transfer was quite sudden from what I understand. Thank you, Father. This is helpful. Robert paused before adding, one more question. Was Father Thomas involved with youth ministry or children's religious education at St. Andrew's? Yes, extensively. He started several youth programs that were quite popular. O'Malley hesitated before adding, most were discontinued after his departure. After thanking Father O'Malley, Robert sat back, processing this new information. The pattern was becoming clearer. Thomas established himself through youth ministry, gained trust, and when whispers began, he was quietly transferred to a new parish where no one knew of the concerns. The church protected its own, and children paid the price. His phone rang, Detective Anderson. Collins, we have a problem. The child services interviewer scheduled for tomorrow, Ellen Ramirez, just called. Someone slashed her tires and left. A note on her windshield. Robert sat forward sharply. What did the note say? Children lie, back off. She's spooked but still willing to do the interviews. We're arranging police protection for her. This changes things, Robert said grimly. Someone's trying to intimidate witnesses and investigators. We need to accelerate our timeline. Agreed. I've already spoken to Judge Michaels about expediting a search warrant based on the children's preliminary statements and the intimidation attempt. Robert's mind raced. Thomas must have supporters who know about the investigation. Or he's taking action himself through proxies. Either way, it means he's worried, Anderson pointed out. People don't resort to intimidation unless they fear exposure. After hanging up, Robert immediately called Captain Barnes to update him on this troubling development. The captain authorized additional security measures for the Wilson and Baker families, as well as round-the-clock surveillance on Father Thomas. We can't arrest him yet, Barnes cautioned, but we can make damn sure he doesn't hurt any more children or flee before we have enough for charges. Robert then called both families to warn them about the escalation. Keep your doors locked, he advised Catherine. Baker, don't answer unexpected knocks. Be careful what you say on the phone or social media. It's already started, Catherine told him, her voice tense. Someone threw eggs at our house last night. The church's prayer circle has been calling non-stop. saying they're praying for our misguided accusations and urging us to seek forgiveness for bearing false witness. Similar reports came from Olivia Wilson. Their families were already experiencing the community backlash that Robert had warned about. It would only intensify as the investigation proceeded. That evening, Robert drove past St. Mary's Church, noticing the lights still on in Father Thomas's office. The priest was working late, perhaps preparing for the coming storm, perhaps covering his tracks. The surveillance team was in position, watching every entrance. Robert continued to his sister's house, where he found Jennifer sitting on her front porch looking troubled. "Something wrong?" he asked, joining her on the porch swing. "The school principal called me in today," she revealed. "Someone complained that I was spreading vicious rumors about Father Thomas. They're reviewing my conduct." Robert's jaw tightened. "They can't fire you for reporting suspected abuse. That's legally protected. They can make my life difficult in other ways." Jennifer sighed. "But that's not what bothers me most. What keeps me up at night is wondering how many other children Thomas has hurt. How many before Emma and Lily, that no one protected." Robert had been wondering the same thing. Given Thomas's careful methods and the pattern of parish transfers, there were almost certainly other victims, perhaps many of them stretching back years. "We'll find them," he promised his sister. "Once this breaks open, others will come forward. That's how these cases typically unfold." Jennifer nodded, though her expression remained haunted. "I keep thinking about what Lily said, how Thomas told her no one would believe her because he was God's representative. How twisted is that, using children's faith against them?" "It's what makes these cases particularly devastating," Robert agreed. "When abuse comes from spiritual authorities, it doesn't just harm the body, it corrupts the victim's relationship with faith itself." As darkness fell completely, Robert's phone buzzed with a text from Anderson. "Judge approved expedited warrant. Search team ready for tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. Things were moving faster now. The intimidation attempt against Ellen Ramirez had backfired, actually accelerating their timeline. By this time tomorrow, they might have the evidence they needed to arrest Father Thomas Spencer and end his reign of abuse. But Robert couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Thomas was already preparing his escape. Men like him always had contingency plans. The question was whether law enforcement could move quickly enough to prevent those plans from being executed. "What happens next?" Jennifer asked, noting his preoccupation with his phone. "Justice," Robert replied simply, "one way or another." The town hall meeting erupted into chaos. Mayor Richardson's attempts to maintain order were drowned out by angry voices from both sides of the aisle. The news about Father Thomas had spread like wildfire, dividing the community into bitterly opposed camps. "We demand answers," shouted George Simmons, a church elder. "Father Thomas has served this community faithfully for years. These accusations are outrageous." Across the room, Olivia Wilson stood, her voice trembling but determined. "Our children are telling the truth. Why would they make up identical stories about what happened in that prayer room?" "Children are suggestible," Margaret Hoffman called out. "Once one tells a story, others follow along. These poor kids are being manipulated by parents with some kind of vendetta against the church." The accusations hung in the air, poisonous and sharp. Catherine Baker sat rigidly beside Sarah Mitchell, both women enduring hostile glares from former friends and neighbors. Catherine's mother-in-law sat pointedly on the opposite side of the room with other church supporters. Detective Collins stood against the back wall, observing the fractured community. The search warrant had yielded damning evidence, rope hidden behind a false panel in the meditation room cabinet, matching the markings on Emma's wrists. Yet even physical evidence wasn't enough to convince those who refused to believe. Mayor Richardson finally managed to restore some semblance of order. "Please, everyone, the investigation is ongoing. Father Thomas has been temporarily relieved of his duties pending the outcome. We must let the legal process work." "And meanwhile, his reputation is destroyed," someone shouted. "What about our children's safety?" countered Michael Wilson, who now stood firmly beside his wife. "Shouldn't that be our priority?" The meeting continued its downward spiral. Outside the town hall, reporters from neighboring communities gathered, sensing a story that would sell papers for weeks to come. The small town's darkest moment was becoming public spectacle. Later that evening, Sarah Mitchell found her car vandalized. "Liar" spray-painted across the driver's side door. At the Wilson home, the phone rang continuously with silent calls or muffled threats. The Baker family returned from dinner to find a dead bird on their porch, a crude message of intimidation. Robert Collins increased patrols near the victims' homes, acutely aware of how ugly these situations could become. Communities under stress often turned on those they perceived as threats to their stability and identity. Father Thomas, meanwhile, maintained his public persona of wounded innocence. Released on bail after his initial arrest, he gave a brief statement to supporters gathered outside his home. "I have faith that the truth will prevail," he said, his voice gentle and assured. "I hold no ill will toward the confused children or their misguided parents. I ask only for your prayers during this difficult time." His carefully chosen words further inflamed tensions, casting himself as the forgiving victim, while subtly undermining the credibility of the accusations against him. Inside St. Mary's Church, an emergency parish council meeting turned bitter. Half the council demanded unwavering support for Father Thomas, while others urged caution, pointing to the evidence police had discovered. "Even if these horrible things are true," council member Frank Peters said, "how do we face our congregation? We vouched for him. We left our children alone with him." "They're not true," Patricia Mitchell snapped. "This is a witch hunt. Father Thomas is being crucified by a secular system that's always been hostile to the church." The divide grew deeper. Friendships of decades dissolved over questions of loyalty and belief. Families who had shared pews on Sundays now passed each other in grocery stores without acknowledgement. At school, Emma and Lily faced their own painful isolation. Other children, hearing fragments of adult conversations, either avoided them entirely or whispered cruel speculations behind their backs. Teachers tried to maintain normalcy but struggled with their own conflicted feelings about the allegations. Detective Collins watched the community fracture, recognizing the pattern from similar cases. The initial shock always gave way to denial, then to anger directed at the victims rather than the perpetrator. It was easier to believe the children were lying than to accept that a trusted spiritual leader had betrayed them so profoundly. What he needed now was irrefutable evidence, something that would break through the wall of denial. The search for Thomas's previous victims continued, building momentum as the media coverage spread. If others came forward, the pattern would become undeniable, but time was working against them. Each day that passed allowed Father Thomas to strengthen his support network, perhaps plan his disappearance if things went against him. The ropes found in the search were damning, but not definitive, without the children's testimony backing them up. It all came down to Emma and Lily now, two small, frightened girls standing against a tide of adult disbelief. Their courage would determine whether justice prevailed or whether Father Thomas would slip away, perhaps to continue his predation elsewhere. Detective Robert Collins stared at the document spread across his desk, illuminated by his desk lamp in the otherwise darkened office. It was past midnight, but sleep eluded him as the pieces of Father Thomas's past began to form a disturbing pattern. His inquiries into the priest's previous assignments had unearthed troubling inconsistencies. Thomas had been transferred from St. Andrew's Parish in Millfield after just 2 years, unusually brief for a priest who had supposedly been performing well. Before that, he'd left Sacred Heart in Lakeside under similarly hurried circumstances. Robert's phone rang, breaking the late-night silence. "Collins," he answered. "Detective, this is Richard Mendez, former board member at Sacred Heart Parish." The man's voice was hushed, tentative. "I got your message. I've been debating whether to call back." Robert straightened, instantly alert. "I appreciate that you did, Mr. Mendez. I'm investigating Father Thomas Spencer's history." "I figured as much." Mendez sighed heavily. "It's happening." "Again, isn't it?" The question hung in the air, weighted with grim implication. "I believe so," Robert confirmed. We have 2 children with consistent accounts of inappropriate behavior during private religious instruction. There were 3 at Sacred Heart, Mendez said quietly, all around 7 or 8 years old. Same pattern, special prayer sessions, religious justifications for inappropriate contact. Robert's pulse quickened. Were formal complaints filed? The diocese handled it internally, Mendez explained, bitterness evident in his tone. Parents were pressured to keep quiet. Thomas was transferred quickly to St. Andrews. We were told he would receive counseling and supervision. But he wasn't monitored at St. Andrews, Robert concluded. I doubt it. The diocese wanted the problem to disappear, not follow him publicly. Mendez paused. I resigned from the board over it, couldn't stomach the cover-up. Would any of those families be willing to speak with me now? Robert asked. I don't know. It was deeply traumatic for everyone involved. The children were ostracized, families pushed out of the church community. Another heavy pause. But I'll reach out. Maybe knowing they're not alone will help. After hanging up, Robert added this new information to his growing timeline. The picture was becoming clearer. Thomas was a serial predator who had been protected by church hierarchy, allowed to move from parish to parish when allegations arose. The next morning, Robert shared his findings with Captain Barnes. We've established a pattern spanning 3 parishes over 8 years. Identical methods, similar age group of victims, same institutional protection. Barnes studied the timeline grimly. The diocese has a lot to answer for. They enabled this. To continue, I've located a former victim who's now 18, Robert added. David Harris, he was at St. Andrews when Thomas was there. He's willing to speak on record about what happened to him. That's significant, Barnes noted. An adult victim's testimony carries different weight than children's, especially in a case with such community division. Harris is driving in tomorrow. We'll take his full statement then. Robert hesitated before continuing. There's something else. Thomas made an unusual transaction yesterday, withdrew nearly $30,000 in cash from his personal account. Barnes's expression darkened. He's preparing to run. That's my assessment. The surveillance team reports he's maintaining normal routines, but something feels off. He's been making brief calls from public phones rather than his cell. Increase. Surveillance, Barnes ordered. If he tries to flee before we can file comprehensive charges, I want him stopped. Later that day, Robert met with Ellen Ramirez, the child services interviewer who had worked with Emma and Lily. Despite the intimidation attempt against her, Ramirez had conducted the formal interviews professionally, building rapport with the frightened girls before gently guiding them through their accounts. Both children provided remarkably consistent details, Ramirez explained, reviewing her notes. The language Father Thomas used, the specific layout of the prayer room, the methods of restraint. These aren't details children typically fabricate or coordinate. What's your professional assessment? Robert asked. These children are telling the truth, she stated firmly. Their emotional responses during disclosure are consistent with trauma, not with fabrication. The developmental details they include are appropriate to their age and experience, another indicator of truthfulness. This professional assessment strengthened their case significantly. Combined with the physical evidence from the search and the emerging pattern from Thomas's past, they were building a solid foundation for prosecution. That evening, Robert received an unexpected visitor at the station. James Baker, Lily's father, had returned from his business trip and requested a meeting. Catherine had warned Robert that James had been skeptical initially, influenced by his mother's staunch defense of Father Thomas. Detective Collins, James greeted him stiffly. I've spent the past 2 days catching up on everything that's happened. I've spoken with Lily, with Catherine, with your sister. Robert nodded, waiting. I owe you an apology, James continued, his composure cracking slightly. I initially questioned whether this investigation was necessary. My mother convinced me it was all a misunderstanding. He paused, struggling visibly. But I've seen the fear in my daughter's eyes. I've heard her nightmares. No child could fake that level of trauma. Your support means everything to Lily and Catherine right now, Robert told him. What can I do to help? James asked. The community's tearing itself apart over this. My own mother won't speak to me since I took Lily's side. Just stand by your family, Robert advised. The truth will prevail, but the journey there won't be easy. As James left, Robert returned to his timeline charts, adding new information as it arrived. Tomorrow would bring David Harris's testimony, potentially the turning point they needed to break through the wall of denial surrounding Father Thomas Spencer. But as the clock ticked forward, Robert couldn't shake the feeling that Thomas was one step ahead of them, patiently waiting for the right moment to disappear. David Harris sat uncomfortably in the interview room, his lanky frame hunched as if trying to make himself smaller. At 18, he was technically an adult, but there was something fragile in his demeanor that spoke to wounds still raw and unhealed. Detective Collins sat across from him, Detective Anderson beside him, both giving the young man time to gather his thoughts. "Take your time, David," Robert said gently. "We appreciate you coming forward." David nodded, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "I saw the news about Father Thomas, about the kids at St. Mary's." His voice was soft but steady. "I couldn't stay silent anymore." "How old were you when you first met Father Thomas?" Anderson asked. 8. My family had just moved to Millfield. We started attending St. Andrew's and I joined the children's choir. David's eyes remained fixed on the table. "Father Thomas took a special interest in me right away. Said I had a pure spirit that needed guidance." Robert nodded encouragingly. "What happened next?" "It started small. Extra lessons after choir practice. Special prayers because I was spiritually gifted." David's fingers traced invisible patterns on the table's surface. Then came the private sessions in what he called the room of spiritual discipline. Over the next hour, David detailed Father Thomas's methodical grooming process, how he isolated vulnerable children, used religious language to normalize abuse, and ensured silence through spiritual manipulation. He said the ropes were blessed, that being bound helped focus the spirit while the flesh was purified. David's voice cracked slightly. "I believed him at first. I thought it was normal, painful, scary, but necessary for my spiritual growth. That's how much I trusted him." Robert kept his expression neutral, despite the fury building inside him. The parallels to Emma and Lily's accounts were unmistakable. The same techniques, the same manipulative language, even the same blessed. "Zoe, did you ever tell anyone what was happening?" Anderson asked. David nodded, a bitter smile twisting his lips. "When I was 10, I finally told my mother. She was horrified, took me straight to the parish council." "What happened then?" "They called in the diocese representatives. There were meetings, lots of meetings. Father Thomas denied everything. Of course." David's voice hardened. "They asked me so many questions over and over, like they were trying to catch me in a lie. My story never changed, but they still seemed to doubt me." "Were the police ever involved?" Robert asked, already suspecting the answer. "No. The church officials said they would handle it internally. They told my parents that involving police would only traumatize me further." David shook his head in disgust. What they really meant was it would embarrass the church. And then Father Thomas was transferred? Suddenly. One Sunday he was just gone. The parish priest announced he'd been reassigned to St. Mary's. David looked up, meeting Robert's eyes directly for the first time. "They made it sound like a promotion, like nothing had happened. What about you? Did you receive any counseling or support?" David's laugh was hollow. "The diocese offered therapy with a church-approved counselor who spent most of our sessions talking about forgiveness and moving on. Meanwhile, half the congregation treated my family like we'd done something wrong. We stopped attending church altogether after a few months." Robert made careful notes, mind racing. David's testimony provided the pattern evidence they desperately needed, proof that Thomas's behavior was calculated, repeated and previously reported but covered up. "David, would you be willing to testify to all this in court? It would mean facing Father Thomas again." The young man's hands trembled slightly, but he nodded firmly. That's why I'm here. Those kids at St. Mary's, Emma and Lily, right? They need someone to stand up for them, someone who understands what they're going through. After the interview concluded, Robert walked David out, thanking him again for his courage. As the young man left, Robert turned to Anderson, his expression grim. We've got him. This testimony connects everything, establishes the pattern, confirms the methodology, and proves the institutional cover-up. Anderson nodded solemnly. I'll expedite the warrant amendment to include charges related to David's case. The statute of limitations hasn't expired since he was a minor when it occurred. Back at his desk, Robert updated his case files, energy renewed by the breakthrough. David's testimony wasn't just valuable evidence. It was validation for Emma and Lily, confirmation that they weren't alone and would be believed. His phone rang, the surveillance team watching Father Thomas's residence. Detective, we've got movement. Thomas just loaded a suitcase into his car. Looks like he might be planning to leave. Stay on him, Robert ordered sharply. Don't approach yet, but don't lose him. I'll get the arrest warrant expedited. Robert immediately called Judge Winters, explaining the urgent situation. With David's testimony and the evidence of Thomas preparing to flee, the judge agreed to issue an immediate arrest warrant for multiple counts of child sexual abuse spanning years and jurisdictions. Within 30 minutes, Robert was in an unmarked car heading toward Father Thomas's residence, the signed warrant secure in his pocket. 2 patrol cars followed at a distance, ready to assist if necessary. The surveillance team reported that Thomas was still at home, moving between rooms with increasing frequency. He's agitated, the surveillance officer noted, making more trips to the car with small bags. Definitely looks like he's preparing to run. Robert accelerated slightly, determined to reach Thomas before he could flee. They were so close to justice now. He couldn't let the priest escape to potentially harm more children elsewhere. As he approached Thomas's street, Robert's phone rang again. Collins, he answered tersely. Detective, it's Ellen Ramirez from Child Services. Something important has come up with Emma Wilson. Robert frowned. I'm in the middle of apprehending our suspect. Can it wait? I don't think so, Ramirez replied, her voice urgent. Emma's remembered something critical, photographic evidence. She says Father Thomas took pictures during some of the prayer sessions and stored them in a special box behind the altar in the meditation room. Robert's pulse quickened. If true, this would be the most damning evidence possible. We searched that room thoroughly. There was nothing behind the altar. Emma was very specific, Ramirez insisted. She said there's a hidden panel in the floor, under the prayer rug, beneath the altar. Thomas showed it to her once, told her the pictures would keep her honest if she ever thought about telling anyone. I'll have a team check it immediately, Robert promised, his mind racing. If such evidence existed, it would shatter any remaining doubt about Thomas's guilt. As he turned onto Thomas's street, Robert could see the priest loading what appeared to be a final bag into his sedan. There, eyes met briefly across the distance, Thomas freezing for a moment before slamming his trunk closed and rushing toward the driver's door. He's running, Robert radioed to the backup units. Move in now, Thomas's car screeched away from the curb. As Robert accelerated toward him, the patrol cars converged from side streets, sirens blaring. For a moment it seemed Thomas might attempt to outrun them, but with exits blocked, he finally pulled over, his escape thwarted. Robert approached the vehicle cautiously, hand on his weapon. Father Thomas Spencer, you're under arrest for multiple counts of child sexual abuse. Please step out of the vehicle slowly. Thomas's composed facade finally cracked as officers handcuffed him. The mask of pastoral serenity slipped away, revealing the cold calculation beneath. Those children are confused, he insisted, his voice no longer gentle but sharp with anger. You're destroying a life of service based on childish fantasies. Save it for court, Robert replied evenly. We have testimony spanning 3 parishes and 8 years, and now we're checking the church for the photographs Emma Wilson told us about. At the mention of photographs, Thomas's expression changed subtly. a flicker of genuine fear crossing his face before he could suppress it. Robert knew then that Emma's revelation was accurate. The physical evidence they needed most likely existed exactly where she had described it. As officers led Thomas to a patrol car, Robert called the search team already assembled at the church. Check under the prayer rug beneath the altar in the meditation room. Emma says there's a hidden compartment in the floor. Don't miss it. Justice was finally catching up to Father Thomas Spencer. For Emma, Lily, David, and who knew how many other children, the long nightmare was one step closer to ending. Father Thomas sat silently in the interrogation room, hands folded neatly on the table before him. His earlier agitation had vanished, replaced by the calm, composed demeanor he had perfected over years of deception. Beside him, his attorney, an expensive specialist in criminal defense provided by unknown benefactors, watched the detectives with cool professional detachment. "My client has nothing to say at this time," the attorney stated flatly. "We'll be filing for immediate bail." Detective Anderson nodded slightly. "That's his right, but he should know we've just received word from the search team at St. Mary's." Thomas's expression remained carefully neutral, though Robert, observing from behind the one-way glass, noticed a subtle tightening around his eyes. "They found the hidden compartment under the altar," Anderson continued, "exactly where Emma Wilson described it." For a fraction of a second, Thomas's mask slipped, fear flashing across his features before he could suppress it. His attorney placed a warning hand on his arm, silencing whatever response might have formed. Robert turned away from the window, meeting Captain Barnes's gaze. "He knows we've got him. Those photographs will destroy any remaining doubt." "If they're as explicit as Emma suggested, we're looking at additional federal charges," Barnes confirmed. "Our tech team is processing them now, documenting the chain of evidence carefully." Robert's phone buzzed, a text from the forensic team. Multiple victims identified in photos, at least 7 different children over what appears to be several years. Dates and locations marked on back of each image. He showed the message to Barnes, whose expression hardened. Meticulous record-keeping. He documented everything. Predators often do, Robert noted grimly. It's part of the thrill for them, having proof of their power over victims. Meanwhile, news of Father Thomas's arrest spread rapidly through the community. At St. Mary's Church, parishioners gathered in shocked disbelief, some weeping openly, others angrily denouncing the police action as persecution. The discovery of the hidden photographs had not yet become public knowledge. "This is a witch hunt," Gerald Thompson declared to the assembled crowd. "Father Thomas is a good man, a holy, and these accusations are absurd." But as he spoke, doubt had begun creeping into the minds of even Thomas's most steadfast defenders. The priest's attempted flight looked suspiciously like an admission of guilt. Margaret Hoffman, who had been among his most vocal supporters, stood silently at the edges of the group. She had taught Sunday school alongside Father Thomas for years, had trusted him completely with children in her care. The thought that she might have unknowingly enabled abuse made her physically ill. Across town, in the Baker household, Catherine received the news of Thomas's arrest with quiet relief. Lily had been sleeping poorly, plagued by nightmares, but knowing her abuser was in custody might finally bring some peace. "Is it really over, Mom?" Rachel asked, hovering protectively near her younger sister. "The investigation part is mostly over," Catherine explained carefully. "There will still be a trial, but Father Thomas can't hurt anyone else now." Lily looked up from her coloring book, her small face serious. "Will I have to see him again, in court?" Catherine knelt beside her daughter. "I don't know yet, sweetheart. But if you do, Dad and I will be right there with you. And you won't be alone. Emma will be there too, and even a grown-up named David who Father Thomas hurt a long time ago." Lily considered this solemnly before nodding. "I can be brave if Emma and David are brave too." At the Wilson home, similar conversations unfolded. Emma had been both frightened and empowered by her revelation about the hidden photographs. Her memory of that specific detail had provided crucial evidence. turning her from victim to active participant in bringing her abuser to justice. "You did something really important," Olivia told her daughter gently. "Because of your bravery, Father Thomas can't hurt any more children." Emma's expression remained solemn beyond her years. "Are the other kids okay? The ones in the pictures?" "With me?" The question broke Olivia's heart. Even after all Emma had endured, her concern was for other victims. "The police are finding them now," she explained. "They'll make sure everyone gets help." Back at the station, Robert reviewed the growing case file. Thomas's methodical documentation of his crimes had unwittingly created the strongest possible evidence against him. The photographs, combined with victim testimony and the physical evidence from the meditation room, formed an insurmountable case. But justice for past victims wasn't Robert's only concern. The investigation had revealed systemic failures within the church hierarchy. Officials who had enabled Thomas by quietly transferring him when allegations arose, prioritizing the church's reputation over children's safety. "We need to expand the investigation," he told Captain Barnes. "The diocese officials who covered this up are complicit." Barnes nodded thoughtfully. "I've already contacted the state attorney's office. They're considering charges against several church administrators for failure to report and endangering minors." As Thomas spent his first night in custody, denied bail due to flight risk, the full scope of his crimes continued to emerge. Investigators identified more victims from the photographs, some dating back over a decade. Calls began coming in from other parishes where Thomas had served briefly. More victims finding the courage to speak up now that the wall of silence had finally been breached. For Detective Collins, the case represented both victory and heartbreak. Thomas would face justice, but the damage he had inflicted on countless children could never be fully repaired. The community's blind trust had enabled years of abuse, a painful lesson in the danger of placing anyone, even beloved spiritual leaders, above accountability. 3 weeks after Father Thomas's arrest, St. Mary's Church stood half-empty during Sunday service. The interim priest, Father Michael Donovan, spoke to the diminished congregation about healing, truth, and the difficult path of reconciliation that lay ahead. Many pews sat vacant. Some parishioners had stopped attending altogether, while others had transferred to neighboring parishes, unable to face the place where such betrayal had occurred. In the back row, Sarah Mitchell sat quietly, observing the community she had once felt fully part of. The discovery of the photographic evidence had silenced most of Thomas's defenders, but the damage to relationships ran deep. Former friends passed each other in grocery store aisles with averted eyes, the shared shame too painful to acknowledge directly. After the service, Sarah found herself approached by Margaret Hoffman, who had been one of Thomas's most vocal supporters. "Sarah," Margaret began hesitantly, her usual confidence absent, "I owe you an apology. What I said at the town meeting, I was wrong. We were all wrong." Sarah nodded, accepting the apology without needless words. She understood the complex emotions roiling through the community, the guilt of having trusted Thomas, the shame of having doubted the children, the anger at being deceived so thoroughly. "The healing has to start somewhere," Sarah replied gently. "Acknowledgement is the first step." Across town, Catherine Baker hosted a small gathering of the families affected by Father Thomas's abuse. The Wilsons were there, along with 2 other families whose children had been identified in the photographs. David Harris had also come, driving down for the weekend to meet the younger victims and their parents. In the backyard, the children played together under Rachel's watchful supervision, some moments of normal childhood joy breaking through their shared trauma. Inside, the adults spoke in low voices about therapy options, the upcoming legal proceedings, and the ongoing media attention that had turned their small town into an unwilling cautionary tale. "The diocese representatives want to meet with us," James Baker informed the group. "They're offering therapy funding, compensation, the works. Now that they've been caught enabling a predator," Michael Wilson remarked bitterly. "Where was this support when children first reported Thomas years ago?" Olivia placed a calming hand on her husband's arm. "It's too late for what should have happened. But it's not too late for the children to get the help they need. David Harris, now the unofficial elder statesman of the victims, nodded in agreement. The therapy helps. It really does. It took me years to understand that what happened wasn't my fault, that Father Thomas deliberately used my faith against me. The healing process had indeed begun, though it would be neither quick nor easy. Detective Collins had connected the families with a support network for abuse survivors, creating a framework for long-term recovery. Each child responded differently to the trauma. Emma had become quietly determined, channeling her experience into protecting others, while Lily still struggled with nightmares but found comfort in art therapy. At the police station, Robert Collins reviewed the latest developments in the expanding investigation. The state attorney's office had filed charges against 3 diocesan officials for failure to report known abuse and endangering minors through the deliberate reassignment of Father Thomas to new parishes. The church is in full damage control mode, Anderson commented, dropping a press release on Robert's desk. They're claiming this was an isolated situation that slipped through procedural cracks. Robert scanned the document, noting the carefully crafted language that acknowledged wrongdoing while minimizing institutional culpability. Yet we've identified 13 victims across 3 parishes over 12 years. That's not slipping through cracks. That's a systemic failure to protect children. The evidence they had gathered painted a damning picture, not just of Thomas, but of a religious institution that had prioritized its reputation over the safety of children entrusted to its care. Each transfer had given Thomas access to new victims, while burying the evidence of his past crimes. "How's your sister holding up?" Anderson asked. "Better now that the school board has officially cleared her of any wrongdoing," Robert replied. The initial complaint against her for spreading rumors about Father Thomas has been withdrawn, with apologies. Similar recantations were happening throughout the community as the full scope of Thomas's crimes became impossible to deny. Those who had been quickest to defend him now found themselves grappling with their own role in enabling his continued abuse through their unquestioning support. Martha Baker, Catherine's mother-in-law, had perhaps the most difficult reconciliation journey ahead. She had been among Thomas's staunchest defenders, had accused her own granddaughter of fabrication, and now faced the irrefutable evidence of his guilt. She had not yet found the courage to visit the Baker home, sending instead a short, painful letter, acknowledging her mistake and begging forgiveness. "Some wounds take longer to heal," James had told Catherine after reading his mother's letter. "She's not just facing that she was wrong about Thomas, she's facing that she failed Lily when it mattered most." In the Wilson household, healing took different forms. Emma had started sleeping through the night again, the knowledge of Thomas's imprisonment providing a security that allowed her to relax her vigilance. Michael had thrown himself into advocacy work, connecting with organizations focused on preventing institutional abuse and improving accountability within religious settings. Olivia maintained a journal documenting their journey, understanding that someday Emma might want to know how her family had navigated this difficult time. "We're not just surviving this," she wrote one evening. "We're showing Emma that truth matters, that her voice matters, and that adults can be trusted to protect her when she speaks up about wrongdoing." The case had transformed Detective Collins as well. His determination to bring Thomas to justice had evolved into a broader mission to address the systemic issues that enabled such abuse. He had begun developing specialized training for officers in recognizing and investigating institutional abuse, particularly in religious settings where traditional authority structures often discouraged questioning. "The Thomas case is going to change how we handle these investigations," Captain Barnes noted during a department briefing. "Collins has shown us that these cases require different approaches, understanding the power dynamics, the specialized grooming techniques, the institutional protections that can hinder investigations." As spring gave way to early summer, St. Mary's Church announced plans for a community healing service, inviting all parishioners past and present to begin the process of rebuilding trust. Father Donovan, working closely with child protection, experts had implemented new safeguards for all youth activities, transparent doors on all meeting rooms, multiple adult supervision at all times, and clear reporting procedures for any concerns. The Bakers and Wilsons discussed whether to attend, ultimately deciding that reclaiming the physical space of the church as a safe place might be important for their children's healing. "We won't let Father Thomas take their faith from them too," Catherine explained to the support group. "That would be giving him one more victory he doesn't deserve." The Sunday of the healing service dawned clear and warm. Sarah Mitchell arrived early, helping to arrange the simple white flowers that adorned the altar. Slowly, community members began to fill the pews, some returning for the first time since the scandal broke. The atmosphere was subdued but determined, a collective acknowledgement that healing required showing up, facing painful truths, and moving forward together. When the Baker and Wilson families entered quietly, taking seats near the back, a ripple of recognition passed through the congregation. Many parishioners nodded respectfully, acknowledging the courage it took for these families to return to the place where their children had been harmed. Father Donovan's sermon spoke of broken trust and the long road to restoration. "We failed as a community," he stated plainly. "We failed to protect our most vulnerable members. We failed to listen when concerns were raised. True healing begins with honest acknowledgement of these failures." As the service concluded, Margaret Hoffman approached the Bakers and Wilsons, other former Thomas supporters beside her. No grand speeches were made, no dramatic reconciliations occurred, just simple human connection, the beginning of bridges being rebuilt. Outside the church, Detective Collins watched from his parked car, not wanting to intrude, but needing to witness this step in the community's healing journey. Jennifer sat beside him, having decided to attend the next service once she saw how this one unfolded. "It's a start," she said quietly. Robert nodded. "Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about restoration when possible. These people are trying to find their way back to each other." As families dispersed across the church lawn, children, including Emma and Lily, ran and played in the summer sunshine. Their resilience a powerful reminder of why the painful truth had been worth uncovering. Their laughter, still tentative but genuine, offered hope that healing, while never complete, was genuinely possible. Detective Robert Collins reviewed the Waibam judge's denial of Father Thomas's latest bail appeal with grim satisfaction. The priest would remain in custody until trial, deemed both a flight risk and a danger to the community. The photographic evidence had destroyed any chance of pretrial release, revealing a predatory pattern spanning years and involving more victims than initially suspected. His phone rang. Captain Barnes. "Collins, we've got a situation. Thomas's lawyer just filed for a competency hearing claiming his client is experiencing religious delusions and may not be fit to stand trial." Robert's grip tightened on the phone. "That's a delay tactic. Thomas was lucid and calculating when we arrested him. He was actively fleeing." "I know," Barnes agreed. "But his legal team is pulling out all the stops. They've brought in a psychiatrist who specializes in religious figures experiencing spiritual crises." After hanging up, Robert paced his office, frustration building. The legal maneuvering wasn't surprising. Defendants with resources often employed such strategies to postpone judgment, but each delay prolonged the victim's wait for justice and closure. His contemplation was interrupted by Officer Jenkins. "Detective, there's someone here you should talk to. Former administrative assistant at the diocesan office. Says she has information about Father Thomas's previous transfers." The woman, Eleanor Prescott, sat nervously in the interview room, fingers fidgeting with her purse strap. "I worked for Bishop Montgomery for 15 years, she began after introductions. "I handled much of the confidential correspondence regarding priest assignments." "Including Father Thomas's transfers?" Robert prompted gently. Eleanor nodded. "3 of them, each following the same pattern. Urgent calls from parish leadership, closed-door meetings with the bishop, quietly arranged transfers with minimal documentation." Her voice trembled slightly. "I knew something wasn't right, but I told myself it wasn't my place to question." "What changed your mind about coming forward?" "The photographs," she said, her expression pained. "When I saw the news, all those children, I realized my silence made me complicit." Eleanor provided dates, names of officials involved, and details of conversations she had overheard. Valuable evidence for the expanded investigation into institutional cover-up. More importantly, she revealed that Thomas had been transferred not just 3 times as they knew, but 5 times over 15 years. There were 2 earlier parishes, St. Brendan's in Westfield and Holy Trinity in Marshfield. The same pattern just before I started working for the diocese. Eleanor handed Robert a folder of copied documents. "I kept these against policy. Something told me they might be needed someday." Robert immediately assigned officers to investigate these additional locations, suspecting they would uncover more victims. The case against Thomas was already solid, but establishing the full extent of his crimes and the institutional enabling was crucial for both justice and prevention. That evening, Robert briefed both the Wilson and Baker families on the latest developments. They had requested regular updates, needing to prepare their children for each new stage of the legal process. "Thomas's legal team is attempting to delay the trial," he explained candidly. "It's a common tactic, but it won't work. The evidence is too overwhelming." "How are the other victims doing?" Catherine asked. "The ones from the photographs?" "Most have been identified and contacted," Robert replied. "They're receiving support services. Some may testify at trial, though the photographs may make that unnecessary." Michael Wilson leaned forward. "And the church officials? Will they face real consequences?" "The investigation is expanding," Robert assured him. "We've discovered additional parishes where Thomas served and was transferred under suspicious circumstances. Each new location strengthens the case against those who enabled him." As the adults discussed legal strategies, Emma and Lily played quietly in the next room with Rachel, their resilience inspiring despite the trauma they had endured. Their childhoods had been forever altered, but with proper support, they were beginning to reclaim their sense of security and trust. Back at the station the next morning, Robert received an urgent call from Detective Parker in Westfield, who had been investigating Thomas's time at St. Brendan's. "Collins, we found something disturbing," Parker reported. "Thomas wasn't alone in his activities at St. Brendan's. Another priest, Father Gregory Manning, appears to have participated in at least some of the abuse." Robert sat forward sharply. "Do we know where Manning is now?" "That's why I'm calling," Parker said grimly. "He was transferred to Sacred Heart in Millfield last year. According to parish records, he runs their youth ministry program." The implications struck Robert like a physical blow. If Thomas and Manning had worked together, it suggested a network rather than a lone predator. Manning might have continued the abuse pattern independently after Thomas's transfer. "We need to move on this immediately," Robert decided. "I'll contact Millfield PD to start surveillance on Manning while we gather evidence for a warrant." Within hours, an interjurisdictional task force was assembled. The potential that another active predator was working with children created urgent time pressure. Robert coordinated with Millfield detectives to establish 24-hour surveillance on Father Manning while expediting the warrant process. Judge Winters reviewed the evidence linking Manning to Thomas, including photographs showing both men together at St. Brendan's, and witness statements from 2 victims who mentioned Father Greg being present during some of Thomas's prayer sessions. "The warrant is approved," Judge Winters confirmed by phone. "But Collins, tread carefully. If this is truly a network, there could be powerful people involved in protecting it." The warning resonated with Robert's own concerns. The extent of the diocesan cover-up already uncovered suggested influences beyond local church officials. Manning might have connections they hadn't yet identified. At dawn the following day, Robert joined the Millfield police team approaching Sacred Heart Rectory, where Manning resided. The morning light cast long shadows across the church grounds as officers took positions around the building. "Father Manning," Detective Williams from Millfield PD called through the door. "Police, we have a warrant." Silence greeted them. After the required waiting period, officers breached the door, entering with weapons ready. The residence was empty. Bed made, closet partially emptied, personal items gone. He's running, Robert concluded, surveying the hastily abandoned living space. Someone tipped him off. An APB went out immediately. Manning's photograph and vehicle description were distributed to law enforcement agencies statewide. Border Patrol and transportation hubs received alerts. The manhunt was officially underway. Hours later, a state trooper reported spotting Manning's sedan heading west on Highway 16. Subject appears to be alone, traveling approximately 5 miles over the speed limit, not driving erratically. "Don't approach yet," Robert instructed over the radio as he and Detective Williams raced toward the location. "Maintain visual contact only. We don't want to spook him into doing anything dangerous." As they closed in on Manning's location, Robert considered the man they were pursuing. Unlike Thomas, whose calculated persona had been perfected over decades, Manning was younger, potentially less experienced at evading capture. That could make him either easier to apprehend or more dangerously unpredictable. The pursuit team strategically positioned patrol cars at upcoming exits, prepared to deploy spike strips if necessary. Manning eventually pulled into a roadside motel, apparently unaware he was being tracked. Officers established a perimeter, while Robert and Williams approached the office to confirm which room he had checked into. "Room 17, the clerk confirmed, pointing to a unit at the far end of the single-story building. Paid cash for one night, seemed nervous. With tactical officers in position, Robert approached the room, positioned to the side of the door. "Father Gregory Manning, police, open the door. We have a warrant for your arrest." Silence followed, then a crash from inside the room. Manning had apparently attempted to escape through the bathroom window, only to find officers waiting. The brief struggle ended with Manning in handcuffs, his clerical collar askew, his facade of pastoral dignity shattered. As they led him to the patrol car, Manning finally spoke, his voice eerily similar to Thomas's in its measured control. "This is a misunderstanding. I was simply taking a spiritual retreat. With emptied bank accounts and half your possessions," Robert challenged. "Save it for court, Father. We have victims who've identified you already." Manning's expression hardened, his pretense of innocence abandoned. "Thomas talked too much, always documenting everything. I told him it would be his downfall." The inadvertent confession confirmed Robert's suspicions about a coordinated pattern of abuse. As Manning was secured in the vehicle, Robert called Captain Barnes with the update. "We got him, and he's already implicated himself and confirmed the connection to Thomas." The capture of Father Manning represented not just another predator removed from access to vulnerable children, but a breakthrough in understanding the networked nature of the abuse. If two priests had coordinated their activities, there might be others, a possibility Robert found both disturbing and motivating. Back in Bayview that evening, Robert shared the news with Jennifer. "Manning's arrest changes the scope of this case significantly. We're no longer looking at isolated predators, but potentially an organized system of abuse and protection." Jennifer absorbed this soberly. "What does this mean for Emma and Lily's case?" "Their testimony remains central to Thomas's prosecution," Robert assured her. "But the larger investigation is expanding. This goes beyond individual parishes now. We're looking at systemic issues throughout the diocese." As Manning was processed into custody, denied bail just as Thomas had been, Robert returned to his expanding case files, more determined than ever to uncover the full extent of the predatory network. The capture of both priests was significant, but he sensed they had only begun to unravel a pattern of abuse and institutional protection that had persisted for decades. The courthouse steps were crowded with media vans, reporters, and divided groups of community members as Father Thomas's trial finally began. 6 months had passed since his arrest. 6 months of legal maneuvering, additional victims coming forward, and the expanding investigation into the church's role in enabling his decades of abuse. Inside, the courtroom was solemn and tense. Father Thomas sat beside his defense team, dressed in a conservative suit rather than his clerical garb. his expression composed and attentive. Gone was the fleeing suspect Detective Collins had arrested. In his place sat a man carefully crafted to appear reasonable and wrongfully accused. The Wilson and Baker families entered quietly, seated in a reserved section. Emma and Lily were present only for the opening statements. The judge had ruled. They would testify via closed-circuit television to minimize additional trauma. David Harris sat with them, providing silent support from someone who truly understood their experience. District Attorney Melissa Chen approached the jury for her opening statement, her manner direct and uncompromising. "This case is about trust betrayed," she began. "Trust placed in Father Thomas Spencer by parents, by the community, and most devastatingly by the children he systematically abused over a period spanning more than a decade." She methodically outlined the evidence, the testimony of multiple victims across different parishes, the physical evidence recovered from the church, and most damning of all, Thomas's own photographic documentation of his crimes. These photographs, meticulously labeled and hidden, reveal not moments of confusion or misunderstanding, but a calculated pattern of predatory behavior by a man who used his spiritual authority to manipulate and silence his victims. Thomas's attorney, Martin Walsh, followed with a defense strategy that focused on attacking the credibility of the victims and suggesting alternative explanations for the physical evidence. The photographs show children in religious instruction. Nothing more, Walsh argued smoothly. The prosecution has constructed a narrative of abuse from innocent spiritual guidance, influenced by the suggestible memories of children and the hysteria of a community too quick to believe the worst. Robert Collins, seated behind the prosecution table, noted how skillfully Walsh avoided addressing the most damning aspects of the evidence, instead weaving a counter-narrative of misunderstanding and overreaction. The prosecution's first witness was Detective Anderson, who detailed the investigation, the discovery of the hidden compartment at St. Mary's, and the evidence linking Thomas to similar activities at his previous parishes. The rope recovered from the meditation room matches exactly the marks documented on Emma Wilson's wrists, Anderson testified. The knot pattern is distinctive and consistent with the restraints visible in the photographs. Walsh's cross-examination attempted to suggest that Anderson's investigation had been biased from the start. Detective Collins, who initiated this investigation, has a personal connection to one of the alleged victims, correct? Detective Collins recused himself from directly interviewing the children, Anderson clarified. All protocols for avoiding conflicts of interest were strictly followed. As the first day of testimony concluded, the media analysis focused largely on the prosecution's strong opening and the defense's strategy of creating doubt through alternative explanations. Legal experts invited to comment generally agreed that the photographic evidence presented significant challenges for the defense to overcome. Outside the courthouse, Robert briefed the families on the day's proceedings. "The defense is following a predictable strategy," he explained. "They'll attack credibility, suggest confusion or misinterpretation, and try to create reasonable doubt wherever possible." "Will it work?" Michael Wilson asked tensely. "The photographs make that unlikely," Robert assured him. "Most abuse cases rely heavily on testimony, which can be challenged. Physical evidence of this nature is much harder to explain away." The second day brought David Harris to the witness stand. Now 19, he spoke with quiet dignity about his experiences as an altar boy under Father Thomas's supervision at St. Andrew's Parish. He said the special prayer sessions would bring me closer to God, David testified. That the ropes were blessed, that being restrained helped focus my spirit while my body was purified. Walsh approached his cross-examination, cautiously, aware that attacking an adult victim too aggressively could alienate the jury. "Mr. Harris, you didn't report these alleged incidents until nearly 10 years after they supposedly occurred. Isn't it possible your memories have been influenced by subsequent events in your life?" David met the attorney's gaze steadily. "I reported when I was 10 years old. The church officials chose not to involve police. As for my memories, the things Father Thomas did to me aren't something you forget or misremember. no matter how much time passes. The courtroom fell silent at his response, the simple truth of his statement hanging in the air. Even some jurors, who had appeared skeptical during opening arguments, seemed moved by David's unwavering testimony. The prosecution next presented Eleanor Prescott, whose evidence about the diocesan cover-up established the pattern of Thomas's transfers following allegations. Her documentation directly contradicted the church's official position that they had no prior knowledge of concerns about Thomas's behavior with children. As the trial's first week concluded, public opinion began shifting decisively against Father Thomas. The steady accumulation of evidence, testimony from multiple victims, and the damning documentation of the church's role in enabling his continued access to children painted a picture too compelling to dismiss. For Emma and Lily, who would face their greatest challenge the following week when they would testify, the community's growing acceptance of the truth offered some comfort. They would not be speaking into a void of disbelief, but to a jury and public increasingly ready to hear and believe their experiences. The courtroom was hushed as the jury filed back in after 3 days of deliberation. Father Thomas sat motionless beside his attorneys, his composure intact but strain visible around his eyes. The past 2 weeks of testimony had been devastating to his defense, particularly the brave accounts given by Emma and Lily via closed-circuit television. Both girls had spoken with quiet dignity beyond their years, their consistent stories impossible to dismiss as misunderstanding or fabrication. Even Thomas's most steadfast supporters had fallen silent in the face of such testimony, combined with the physical evidence and the pattern established across multiple parishes. Judge Montgomery addressed the courtroom. Has the jury reached a verdict? The forewoman stood, a middle-aged woman who had listened attentively throughout the proceedings. We have, Your Honor. Sarah Mitchell sat directly behind the Wilson and Baker families, all of them gripping each other's hands tightly. Across the aisle, members of the church community waited, many having gradually shifted from denial to horrified acceptance as the evidence mounted. On the first count of child sexual abuse against Emma Wilson, we find the defendant, Thomas Spencer, guilty. Olivia closed her eyes briefly, a tear sliding down her cheek as she squeezed Michael's hand. The forewoman continued steadily through all counts, 13 in total, representing each identified victim from the photographs and testimony. The verdict was the same for each: guilty. Father Thomas's carefully maintained facade finally cracked. His shoulders slumped as the accumulated weight of his crimes was formally acknowledged, his years of manipulation and evasion at last rendered powerless by the truth. Judge Montgomery addressed the court. Sentencing will take place in 2 weeks. Until then, the defendant will remain in custody. She turned her gaze directly to Thomas. Given the severity and pattern of these crimes, and the profound breach of trust they represent, I am informing all parties that I will be considering the maximum sentence allowable under law. As the courtroom began to empty, Detective Collins approached the families. It's over, he said simply. He won't hurt another child. Catherine Baker nodded, tears in her eyes. What about Manning and the church officials who enabled this? Manning's trial begins next month, Robert assured her. And the state attorney's office has filed charges against 3 diocesan administrators for failure to report and endangering minors. This isn't ending with Thomas. Outside the courthouse, a crowd had gathered, the community still processing what had happened in their midst. As the families emerged, something unexpected occurred. A path quietly opened for them, and many people, some who had once doubted or even criticized them, nodded respectfully as they passed. Martha Baker stepped forward hesitantly from the crowd, approaching her son's family. She knelt before Lily, her voice breaking. I'm so sorry I didn't believe you, sweetheart. Can you ever forgive your grandmother? Lily looked at her solemnly for a moment, then stepped forward and wrapped her small arms around Martha's neck. No words were needed. The gesture of forgiveness spoke volumes. 1 month later, the Wilson and Baker families gathered for a picnic in the local park. The children played tag on the grass, their laughter gradually returning to its former carefree quality. Emma and Lily had formed an unbreakable bond through their shared experience, and with proper therapy and support, both were showing remarkable resilience. "They'll always carry this with them," Sarah Mitchell commented quietly to Olivia as they watched. The children, "But they won't be defined by it." Detective Collins, joining them on his day off, nodded in agreement. They helped bring down a predator who had operated for decades. That's something to be proud of, when they're old enough to fully understand it. The expanded investigation had continued to yield results. Father Manning had accepted a plea deal, providing information about other priests involved in similar activities. The diocese was under new leadership, implementing transparent policies and cooperating fully with authorities. Changes that came too late for past victims, but might protect future generations. St. Mary's Church was slowly healing as well. Father Donovan had established a support group for the community, acknowledging that the betrayal had wounded not just the direct victims, but everyone who had trusted Father Thomas. The path to reconciliation was neither quick nor easy, but it had begun with the essential first step: truth. As evening approached, the families gathered for a group photograph, a simple memento of survival and solidarity. Emma and Lily stood in front, their faces reflecting both the innocence they were reclaiming and the wisdom they had gained at too young an age. "Ready?" Jennifer asked, raising the camera. "Say future, future," they chorused, their voices blending together in a moment of hard-earned joy. Behind them, the sun was setting on one chapter of their lives and rising on another, one where truth had prevailed over deception, where courage had overcome fear, and where healing, though never complete, had genuinely begun. Detective Collins watched the scene with quiet satisfaction. Justice had been served, not just through punishment of the guilty, but through vindication of those who had dared to speak truth to power. The road ahead would still hold challenges, but these families would face them together, strengthened by what they had already overcome. For Emma and Lily, night terrors would gradually give way to peaceful sleep. For their parents, hypervigilance would slowly ease into reasonable caution. And for a community forever changed by confronting darkness in their midst, there was the hard-won wisdom that sometimes the most important truths are spoken in the smallest voices. If only we have the courage to listen.